The life of a con artist is built on illusion, charm, and an uncanny ability to read people. And no one mastered the art of deception quite like Victor Lustig, the man who scammed the rich, outwitted the law, and, in his greatest act of trickery, sold the Eiffel Tower twice. To truly appreciate the genius of Lustig, we must go back to where it all began. Born in 1890 in what is now the Czech Republic, young Victor had a sharp mind and a wandering soul. He spoke multiple languages, was well-educated, and had an irresistible charm that made people trust him almost immediately. But where others saw a gift for diplomacy or business, Lustig saw an opportunity to turn deception into an art form. Lustig didn't start with small-time scams. No, that would be too ordinary. He had bigger ambitions. His first major con? Selling money-making machines. Sound absurd, right? But Lustig was a master of psychology. He crafted a sleek, mahogany box with complex mechanisms that appeared to print real $100 bills. The trick? The box was preloaded with 2 authentic bills. Lustig would demonstrate how the machine worked in front of wealthy victims, allowing to print money over the course of several hours. By the time they realized the box was a scam, Lustig was long gone, along with their cash. He sold these machines for tens of thousands of dollars, each time leaving behind a bewildered and embarrassed victim. But Lustig didn't just rely on illusions. He relied on people's greed. He knew that the desire to make easy money blinded even the most skeptical individuals. And that was the foundation of every con he pulled. Victor Lustig's talents took him across Europe and the United States, rubbing shoulders with high society, businessmen, and, most dangerously, mobsters. One of his most infamous encounters? Scamming the legendary Al Capone. Now, let's pause for a moment and really let that sink in. Lustig had the audacity to con one of the most ruthless criminals of the 20th century. Here's how he did it. Lustig approached Capone with an investment opportunity, promising to double his money in just 2 months. The gangster, intrigued, handed over $50,000. But instead of running away with the cash, Lustig did something unexpected. He returned it. Capone, shocked, asked why. Lustig claimed the deal had fallen through, and that he was an honest man who didn't want to cheat him. Capone, impressed by integrity, handed Lustig $5,000 as a reward for his honesty. And just like that, Lustig walked away with thousands of dollars from one of history's most feared men. It was a con wrapped in a con, and it cemented Lustig's reputation as a criminal genius. By the 1920s, Lustig had built an impressive career swindling the wealthy, but he wanted something bigger. He wanted a scam so outrageous, so bold, that it would go down in history. And what better city to pull off such a con than Paris? Post-World War I, France was in turmoil. The economy was unstable, and the government was struggling to maintain public infrastructure. The Eiffel Tower, built for the 1889 World's Fair, was considered an expensive burden. Maintenance costs were soaring, and rumors swirled that the city might dismantle the Iron Giant. Lustig saw an opportunity. If he could make people believe that the Eiffel Tower was truly for sale, he could scam them out of a fortune. It was ridiculous. It was impossible. And it was absolutely perfect. Lustig knew that a scam of this scale required meticulous planning. He created fake government documents and posed as a high-ranking French official from the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. Next, he carefully selected his victims, wealthy scrap metal dealers who had both the funds and the interest in acquiring such a massive structure. He sent out invitations to an exclusive, secret meeting at the luxurious Hotel de Crillon, one of the most prestigious hotels in Paris. The location alone was enough to give his scheme credibility. As the businessmen arrived, Lustig put on a performance worthy of an Oscar. He explained in hushed tones that the government had decided to quietly sell the Eiffel Tower for scrap metal due to its exorbitant maintenance costs. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But discretion was key. The deal had to remain secret, as public outrage would be inevitable. To seal the deal, he played to their egos and greed. He hinted that only a businessman with the right connections and true vision would be able to handle such a massive undertaking. The room was hooked. The men were desperate to win the bid, eager to secure what they believed was the most lucrative deal of their lives. Among the businessmen, one stood out, André Poisson. He was eager, ambitious, and most importantly, desperate to establish himself as a major player in the industry. Lustig sensed his vulnerability and set his sights on him. But here's the thing about great con men. They know when to push and when to pull back. Lustig intentionally acted hesitant, as though he wasn't sure Poisson was the right buyer. This made Poisson even more determined. He needed to prove himself. And that's when Lustig made his final move. He hinted that a small gift to expedite the bureaucratic process would go a long way. Poisson took the bait. He handed over a large sum of money as both a bribe and an initial down payment for the Eiffel Tower. The deal was sealed. Lustig had done it. He had sold the Eiffel Tower. As Poisson prepared to finalize the details of his new purchase, Lustig and his partner fled Paris with the money. Days later, when Poisson realized he'd been scammed, he was too humiliated to report the crime. After all, admitting that he had been foolish enough to believe the Eiffel Tower was for sale would have destroyed his reputation. Lustig had not just pulled off one of the most audacious scams in history. He had done it so flawlessly that his victim chose silence over justice. But here's the most incredible part. Lustig wasn't done yet. He would return to Paris and attempt the very same scam again. And that's where the real suspense begins. Paris in the 1920s was a city of contradictions. Elegant, thriving, yet crumbling under the weight of its own history. The Eiffel Tower, the very symbol of France, stood tall against the skyline, but behind the scenes, it was a bureaucratic nightmare. Maintaining the Iron Giant was costing the government a fortune, and whispers spread that perhaps, just perhaps, it would be easier to tear it down. To most, these were just rumors. To Victor Lustig, they were the perfect foundation for his greatest con. Post-war France was a breeding ground for opportunists. The economy was fragile, the government was in constant disarray, and corruption was rampant. Paris, once the cultural heartbeat of Europe, was struggling to keep up with modernization. Inflation was high, industries were collapsing, and businessmen were desperate for the next big opportunity. Lustig understood one universal truth. Desperation makes fools of even the smartest men. His first sale of the Eiffel Tower had gone off without a hitch. André Poisson had been so humiliated by the scam that he never reported it, allowing Lustig to escape with his fortune intact. But while most con artists would count their blessings and disappear, Lustig had something different in mind. Why stop at selling the Eiffel Tower once when he could sell it again? Most criminals avoid the places where they've committed their biggest heists. Lustig, however, was not most criminals. He returned to Paris just months after his first con, ready to pull off the same scheme with a new set of victims. Once again, he assumed the identity of a high-ranking government official from the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. He forged fresh documents, carefully mimicked the same bureaucratic jargon, and rented out the prestigious Hotel de Crillon, because, as any great scammer knows, appearances are everything. With Paris still reeling from economic instability, Lustig had no trouble finding new potential buyers. Scrap metal dealers were still eager to believe that the government was quietly selling off its most famous landmark. And just like before, Lustig played them like a violin. This time, Lustig's main target was a wealthy industrialist with deep pockets and even deeper desire for power. Like Poisson before him, this businessman wanted to make a name for himself by securing a massive government contract. Lustig used the same tactics that had worked the first time. Exclusivity. He made it seem like the buyers were part of an elite, hand-picked group. Urgency. He hinted that the sale was highly confidential and had to be finalized quickly. Bribery. He subtly suggested that a little extra money could expedite the paperwork. Everything was going according to plan. The businessman was hooked, ready to hand over the money to secure the deal. Lustig could already taste victory. But this time, something went wrong. Unlike Poisson, who had stayed silent out of embarrassment, this new buyer was more cautious. Something about the deal fell off. Maybe it was a tiny inconsistency in Lustig's paperwork. Maybe it was just a gut feeling. Whatever the reason, he decided to verify the sale with a contact in the French government. And just like that, the entire con unraveled. Authorities were alerted, and Lustig's name spread like wildfire. The police launched an investigation. And for the first time in his career, the master con man found himself truly cornered. But Victor Lustig was nothing if not a survivor. The moment he sensed the deal was crumbling, he didn't hesitate. He vanished from Paris overnight, slipping away before the authorities could close in. By the time investigators pieced together what had happened, Lustig was already on a train, making his way out of France. He had been caught, but only in theory. No arrests were made, no money was recovered, and no one could believe that the same scam had almost worked twice. With the French authorities now on high alert, Lustig knew his time in Europe was over. But the world was still full of opportunities. He set his sights on America, where his biggest and boldest schemes were yet to come. By the time Victor Lustig left France, he was already a legend in the world of crime. The man who had conned millionaires, swindled mobsters, and sold the Eiffel Tower twice had now become an almost mythical figure. Victor Lustig was a fugitive. France was no longer safe, and Europe was growing too small for his schemes. He needed a new playing field, somewhere filled with wealth, ambition, and just the right amount of gullibility. And so, he set his sights on America, the land of opportunity. But while many came to America chasing the American dream, Lustig came to sell it. By the mid-1920s, the United States was booming. It was a height of the roaring 20s, a time of excess, blind optimism, and financial speculation. The stock market was soaring, businesses were expanding, and everyone wanted to get rich quick. For a man like Lustig, this was paradise. He arrived in New York, blending effortlessly into the high society he intended to swindle. He dressed impeccably, spoke with the charm of European nobility, and carried himself with an air of mystery that made people eager to trust him. And when people trust you, they open their wallets. Lustig's first big American con was one of his classics, the money printing machine scam. The device, an elegant mahogany box with intricate gears, appeared to print real $100 bills. In truth, it contained only 2 genuine bills, which would slowly print out when the machine was demonstrated. By the time the victim realized it was fake, Lustig had already disappeared with their cash. He sold this miracle machine for anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000 per victim, an enormous sum at the time. Some even paid double when they thought they were getting a faulty machine and needed a replacement. It was an absurd scam, but it worked, because greed makes people believe the impossible. But Lustig's ambitions were far greater than tricking gullible businessmen. He wanted a challenge. He wanted to con the most dangerous man in America. Most con artists would rather rob a bank than cross out Capone, the most feared gangster in America. But Lustig wasn't most con artists. He approached Capone with a seemingly straightforward deal, an investment opportunity that would double Capone's money in 2 months. The gangster, intrigued, handed Lustig $50,000 to invest. Now, here's where Lustig did something unexpected. Instead of running off with the cash, he held on to it for 2 months, untouched. Then, he returned to Capone and told him the deal had fallen through. But because he was an honest man, he was returning every penny. Capone was so stunned by Lustig's supposed integrity that he handed him $5,000 as a thank you. Lustig had just conned a mob boss by pretending not to con him. It was genius. And it was proof that his skills weren't just about stealing money. They were about understanding human psychology better than anyone else. Lustig's cons had made him rich, but he wanted more. And in the late 1920s, he set his sights on counterfeiting money. But he wasn't just printing a few fake bills. He was leading a full-scale operation to flood the American economy with counterfeit cash. Working with a network of forgers, he created flawless $100 bills and distributed them nationwide. The scam was so successful that banks and the Secret Service were in a panic. They knew someone was flooding the market with fake money, but they had no idea who it was. Even in custody, Lustig remained a master of deception. While being held at a New York detention center, he managed to fake a sheet rope, disguise himself as a guard, and escape out a window. For months, he was on the run. But eventually, he was caught again, this time for good. In 1935, he was sentenced to 20 years in Alcatraz, America's most notorious prison. Victor Lustig, the man who had fooled businessmen, banks, and even Al Capone, had finally met the one system he couldn't outwit, the U.S. government. But even in his final days, he remained as elusive as ever. when he died in 1947. His death certificate listed his occupation as apprentice salesman. Victor Lustig wasn't just a con man. He was a legend. He understood that people don't fall for scams because they're stupid. They fall because they want to believe. And that's why, even today, his legacy lives on in books, movies, and crime stories. But the ultimate question remains: was he a villain, or just a man who was smarter than everyone else? If there was one thing Victor Lustig understood better than anyone, it was human nature. He didn't just trick people, he made them trick themselves. And that, dear reader, is the true art of the con. Lustig never stole money. At least, that's not how his victims saw it. No, they handed it over, willingly, eagerly, often with a sense of smug satisfaction that they were in on something exclusive. That's because Lustig mastered the one psychological trick that all great con artists rely on. Right terror will make people feel like they're part of a secret. The Eiffel Tower scam? It worked because the buyers believed they were getting an inside deal on a highly confidential government sale. The money printing machine? The victims thought they had discovered something so valuable that they couldn't afford to let it slip away. The Al Capone con? It worked because Capone thought he had found an honest man in a dishonest world. Lustig knew that once someone believed they were in on something special, their critical thinking shut down. And that's when he struck. The 10 Commandments of a con man. Lustig wasn't just a master manipulator. He was also a teacher. He even wrote down the 10 Commandments of the con man, a set of rules that he followed religiously. Here are a few gems. 1. Be patient. Never rush your victim. Let them think they're the ones in control. 2. Never get drunk on your own lies. Believe in your scam, but never so much that you forget it's a scam. 3. Don't look like a criminal. Dress sharp, act respectable, and always be the most charming person in the room. 4. Let them talk first. The more someone talks, the more they reveal about their weaknesses. 5. Give them a little victory. Let them feel like they figured something out on their own. It makes them trust you even more. Lustig lived by these rules, and they made him unstoppable. How to trick a millionaire in 3 easy steps. Lustig didn't just con petty criminals or naive businessmen. He went after the rich and powerful, the men who thought they were too smart to be fooled. His strategy? Play to their egos. Step 1. The aura of importance. Lustig always dressed in the finest suits, carried himself with the air of a European aristocrat, and spoke with an educated, worldly charm. If you looked like money, people assumed you had money. And if you had money, then you must be trustworthy, right? Step 2. The illusion of scarcity. He never begged for a deal. He made them beg for it. At his fake government auctions, he hinted that only a select few were invited. With his money printing machines, he made buyers feel like they had stumbled upon something incredibly rare. Scarcity breeds desire. Lustig knew that if people thought they might lose a deal, they'd do anything to secure it. Step 3. The final test trick. Once he had someone hooked, Lustig always performed one last trick. He would pretend to hesitate. "Oh, I don't know if I should sell this to you. I need to be sure you're the right person for this opportunity." This did 2 things. 1, it flattered the victim, making them want to prove they were worthy. 2, it forced them to chase the deal instead of being sold on it. By the time Lustig finally reluctantly agreed to take their money, they were practically throwing it at him. Lustig didn't just trick people. He made them believe they wanted to be tricked, even when his victims realized they had been conned. Many refused to go to police out of sheer embarrassment. Think about it. Would you want to admit to the world that you paid thousands of dollars for a fake money-making machine? Would you want to confess that you actually believed you could buy the Eiffel Tower? Lustig knew that shame was more powerful than the law. And that's why, for years, he got away with everything. One of the most underrated parts of Lustig's genius? He knew when to leave. He knew when to leave. Many con men get greedy. They stay in one place too long, trying to squeeze out every last dollar. Lustig, he was a ghost. As soon as he got his payday, he disappeared. No goodbis, no loose ends. By the time his victims realized what had happened, he was already on a train, a boat, or even a different continent. And that's why he never spent a single night in jail, until he broke his own rules. Lustig's downfall didn't come because of some genius detective or brilliant investigator. It came because he got too comfortable. For years, he had moved from scam to scam, always staying one step ahead. But then he made a fatal mistake. He stopped running. His counterfeiting operation was making him so much money that he thought he was untouchable. He got lazy. He got reckless. And that's when the law finally caught up. Even after he was arrested, Lustig had one more trick up his sleeve. While awaiting trial, he faked an escape using a bedsheet rope. It worked for a while, but the authorities weren't dealing with a nameless businessman or a gullible millionaire this time. They were the United States Secret Service. They found him, they captured him, and they sent him to Alcatraz. Even in his final days, Lustig never broke character. On his official death certificate, under occupation, he didn't list criminal or fraudster. He wrote, apprentice salesman. Because even in death, Victor Lustig pulled off one last con, convincing the world that he was just another businessman. But history knows better. Victor Lustig wasn't just another con man. He was a con man. And the world has never seen another like him. Victor Lustig wasn't just a con man. He was a con man. The Michelangelo of deception. The Picasso of fraud. The Shakespeare of scamming. And like all great artists, his influence didn't end when he was caught. Lustig's legendary scams, especially selling the Eiffel Tower, became a blueprint for future con artists. Some were inspired by his techniques. Others unknowingly copied him. Either way, his legacy of lies lived on. Let's dive into the world's greatest con men, the ones who took Lustig's tricks and ran with them. Frank Abagnale, the man who became everyone. If you've seen Catch Me If You Can starring Leonardo DiCaprio, then you already know the name Frank Abagnale. But if Lustig was a master of deception, Abagnale was the master of disguise. His greatest hits? He posed as a Pan Am pilot and flew over 1 million miles for free. He pretended to be a doctor and actually supervised medical procedures. He faked a Harvard law degree and got a job as a lawyer. He wrote $2.5 million in fraudulent checks before the FBI caught him. Sound familiar? Just like Lustig, Abagnale knew that confidence is everything. If you walk into a room like you belong, no one questions you. And just like Lustig, his biggest weapon wasn't forgery or fake documents. It was human psychology. Bernie Madoff, the man who scammed the rich. Lustig knew one golden rule: greed makes people blind. And nobody exploited that better than Bernie Madoff. Madoff didn't sell fake Eiffel Towers or counterfeit money machines. He sold dreams. His Ponzi scheme promised investors huge returns, but in reality, he was just shuffling money around. For decades, people trusted him blindly because he looked like a genius. Sound familiar? Lustig did the same thing with his scams. Madoff's fraud collapsed in 2008, costing investors $64.8 billion, the biggest Ponzi scheme in history. And yet, just like Lustig, Madoff's victims didn't ask questions until it was too late. Because when people want to believe something is true, they will. Charles Ponzi, the original Ponzi schemer. Victor Lustig's career overlapped with another legendary scammer, Charles Ponzi. Yes, that Ponzi, the one who invented the Ponzi scheme. Ponzi promised investors 50% returns in 45 days by buying and reselling postal reply coupons. The trick? There was no trick. He was just paying old investors with new investors' money. It worked until it didn't. When people finally demanded their money back, the whole thing collapsed. Just like Lustig, Ponzi knew how to create an illusion of wealth, played to people's greed, got caught because he got too greedy himself. And like Lustig, he spent his final years in prison. Modern scammers. From crypto cons to social media lies, Lustig's spirit is alive and well today. Except now, con men don't need fake documents or elaborate disguises. All they need is the internet. One, the crypto kingpins. We've seen dozens of scams in the world of cryptocurrency. Fake coins, fake investments, Ponzi schemes disguised as the future of money. People lose millions overnight, all because they trust someone who seems too good to be true. Sound familiar? Victor Lustig would have loved crypto. 2, the Instagram scammers. Nowadays, con artists don't need to print fake money machines. They just need a social media account. Ever seen those influencers promising passive income or secret investment tricks? A lot of them are just modern-day Lustigs, except instead of scamming one person at a time, they scam millions. Lustig tricked the rich. Today's con artists trick everyone. What we can learn from Lustig. So, what does Lustig's story teach us? 1. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Nobody sells the Eiffel Tower. Nobody doubles your money overnight. Nobody gives you a once-in-a-lifetime deal without a catch. 2. People believe what they want to believe. Lustig's victims weren't stupid. They just wanted the scam to be real. That's why scams still work today. 3. Confidence is everything. Lustig never hesitated. He acted like he belonged. That's why people trusted him. Scammers may evolve. Technology may change. But Lustig's playbook will always work. Because human nature never changes. Victor Lustig's last trick. Victor Lustig had spent decades outwitting the law, conning the rich, and living like a phantom, always slipping away just before the noose tightened. He had scammed mobsters. He had tricked high-ranking officials. He had sold the Eiffel Tower. Twice. But even the greatest con man in history couldn't outrun fate forever. This is a story of how Victor Lustig's empire of deception collapsed. And, true to his style, even in defeat, he had one last trick up his sleeve. By the 1930s, Lustig had scaled up his operations. The Eiffel Tower scam had made him a legend in the underground world, but he needed something bigger. So what did he do? He went back to one of his favorite old tricks: fake money. Except this time, it wasn't a phony money printing machine. It was actual counterfeit bills. The perfect counterfeit. Lustig's counterfeit bills weren't sloppy fakes. They were so perfect that even expert bankers struggled to tell them apart from real U.S. currency. The paper felt right. The ink was flawless. The serial numbers? Impeccable. Lustig flooded America with fake bills, slowly bleeding the economy while living like a king. The Secret Service, tasked with hunting down counterfeiters, was baffled. Fake bills were popping up everywhere, but no one could trace them back to a source. Until one day, Lustig got sloppy. It wasn't the police that finally caught Lustig. It wasn't the government. It wasn't one of his victims. It was his own partner in crime. For years, Lustig had worked with a counterfeiting expert named Tom Shaw. Shaw was brilliant, but unlike Lustig, he wasn't a master of deception. And when the Secret Service started sniffing around, Shaw did the one thing Lustig never would have done. He panicked, and then, to save his own skin, he ratted out Victor Lustig. With Shaw's help, the feds tracked Lustig to New York. On September 28, 1935, the most elusive con man in history was finally cornered. And this time there was no escape, or so they thought. The Secret Service arrested Lustig in grand fashion. They slapped him in handcuffs, locked him up in a maximum security federal prison, and prepared to take him to trial. Everyone thought it was over, but they forgot who they were dealing with. Lustig wasn't just a con man. He was an illusionist, and he had one last escape plan. Just days before his trial, Lustig vanished. Somehow, he managed to break out of prison, slipping past guards as if he were made of smoke. The Secret Service was humiliated. A full-scale manhunt swept across America, and for weeks, there was no sign of Lustig. Had he disappeared for good? Had he pulled off one final vanishing act? Not quite. Lustig's luck finally ran out in Pittsburgh. On the streets, wearing a cheap disguise, he was recognized and tackled by a team of federal agents. This time, there were no slick getaways, no bribes, no tricks, no fast-talking cons. Just cold, hard reality. The world's greatest con man had been caught for the last time. The trial of a legend. Victor Lustig's trial was sensational. Newspapers couldn't get enough of the man who had tricked Al Capone, swindled millionaires, and sold the Eiffel Tower twice. Prosecutors threw everything they had at him. And this time, even Lustig couldn't talk his way out. He was sentenced to 20 years in Alcatraz, the most infamous prison in America, a place where even the best escape artists never escaped. The last trick. For years, Lustig sat behind bars, his legend growing. Fellow inmates worshipped him. Guards feared him. And even the warden knew This man wasn't like the others. Rumors swirled that Lustig was planning something big, a final con, but it never came. On March 11, 1947, at the age of 57, Victor Lustig died of pneumonia. Or at least, that's what the official records say. Did Victor Lustig really die? Here's the thing. Victor Lustig was a master of deception. He faked documents for a living. He escaped from prison with ease. He vanished whenever the law got too close. So when news broke that he had died in Alcatraz, some people didn't believe it. They whispered that it was his final trick, that Lustig had faked his own death, switched identities, and slipped away into the shadows. After all, wouldn't that be the perfect ending for the world's greatest con man? Victor Lustig's legacy. Lustig wasn't just a criminal. He was an artist. He didn't steal with violence. He stole with words, with charisma, with pure, unshakable confidence. And more than anything, he understood human nature better than anyone. His tricks are still used today. His methods are copied by con artists, scammers, and fraudsters all over the world. Victor Lustig may be gone, but his legend will never die. Because as long as there are people who want to believe the impossible, there will always be another Victor Lustig. The end, or is it? And there you have it, the story of the man who sold the Eiffel Tower. Twice, the con man who tricked Al Capone, the fraudster who escaped prison, the legend who may have faked his own death. If you love this story, there are plenty more like it. History is full of scammers, tricksters, and masterminds who pulled off the impossible. And trust me, you won't believe what some of them got away with. Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning.